So we're going to go through tracing while loops. I think this is a concept that is a bit confusing. So here is an example of a while loop, and you can see over to the side here that I have some calculations. I have what I think my I is going to be, and then I have my output. I like to keep track of things. Calculations happen in the background. This variable is going to be stored in the background, and output is the only thing that we're going to see on the screen. So here we go over here to the side of the code, and when we read our code, remember we go from the top down, and when there's a loop, the loops always have to have a curly brace and an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace, and everything inside is inside the body of the loop. So we're going to try walking through this bit of code right now. All right, so first we have I is equal to 1. So you can see that we went over here and we set I equal to 1. We're going to drop down and we're going to need to do our check now. So is I, which is set as 1, less than 3? And yes, 1 is definitely less than 3. It meets that condition. So now we're going to drop down to our next line of code, which says we need to print, and it's a print ln, so print line. So that means we're going to move our cursor down to the next line, and we're going to print a string. We're going to print just the word Java, and you can see that that prints out here. So we pop down to our next line of code, and here we go. We're going to increment, and it's an increment operator, so we're going to make I, we're going to add 1 to I. So we say 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. So that's actually a calculation, but just for space constraints, I didn't put that in here. And so now I have our I equal to 2. So we're going to go back up here to our while loop. Again, we don't know how long we're going to go through this. So we're basing it totally upon the condition. So is 2 less than 3? Yes, it definitely is. So we're going to drop down to our print line statement. So the word Java prints is the output. And we're going to pop down and we're going to increment I now. So I is equal to 2, which is what it was before, plus the 1, which is now it's equal to 3. And we're going to pop back up and we're going to look at our condition. Is 3 less than 3? No, it's definitely not less than 3. So we're done with our loop here, and we only have 2 pieces of output. Now, if there was more code, we would drop down to that last section of code there. So let's just put in system out println I. So what would happen there is once this is already done, it's going to print whatever's in the I. So you can see our I output is 3 if we had that on there. So that's how once you exit a loop, you just go down to the code right underneath the closing curly brace. So now if we were to convert our for loops to while loops, so in the for loop, let's just walk through this particular for loop. We have, this one is a little bit different because we're using different variables now. So we have something called sum. Now notice that this sum variable is, we declare it outside of the loop. And the reason for that is we want to be able to use, do you see how we're using sum outside of the loop? If we declared sum inside the loop, we wouldn't really be able to use it anywhere else because it would only be available inside that loop. So we have to declare it outside here before, so that we can use it inside and outside of the loop. So we have sum, we set it equal to 0. Then we have this statement here. So we have, this is a declaration statement. And notice all of these, I've noticed there's some difficulties with how to create or how to declare a for loop. And so you always have to use the semicolons just because, do you see all of our lines of code always end in a semicolon? So this is like having 3 distinct lines of code. That's sort of what we can do inside the for loop. And so we have to use those semicolons. So we set I is now equal to 1. And we move over here to the middle part. So this is where we're going. This is our conditional statement. So this declaration statement only happens once. We never go to it again in a for loop. Now we are looking at our condition statement. So is 1 less than or equal to 4? You betcha. So we're going to drop down inside the body of our loop. And we're going to do sum plus equals I. So that involves a calculation. So we take what sum was, which was set originally at 0, and we're going to add to it I, which we know is set right now at 1. So now the value in our calculation is 1. So sum is equal to 1. And then our loop goes back up here, and we are going to increment I by 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. And we go back to our conditional statement. So again, this is just one loop around and around. This is where we're going to go. It always goes in that order. So we are going to make sum equal to 3. We're going to increment I. We're going to add 1 to it. That's also equal to 3. We go to check our condition. Is 3 less than or equal to 4? Yes, it definitely is. So we go back down. We're going to increase sum by the value of I. So we're going to say 3 plus 3 equals 6. So sum now equals 6. And we go back up and we increment one more time. So 3 plus 1 is 4. We check our condition. 4 is less than or equal to 4 because it's equal to 4. So we go down and we do another calculation on sum. So we take this existing sum value of 6. We add to it the existing I value of 4. We know 6 plus 4 is 10, so sum now equals 10. We go up and we're going to increment I. So I was 4. We add 1 to it, so I is now equal to 5. We're going to check our condition. Is 5 less than or equal to 4? No, it is not. So because of that, we're going to stop, and we're going to drop down to the bottom outside of our loop, and we're going to finally print out what's in the sum variable. So we're going to print out 10. So now we have to try and think, now we understand what's happening in that for loop. We have to move from the for loop to the while loop. So the first thing we have to do is that sum. We declared a new integer, we called it sum, so we have to do the exact same thing over here in the while loop. So we have that line is now over here. So we look at our next line of code in our for loop, and again, that is the declaration statement for I. So we're going to do the same thing right here. We're going to say I, and we're going to assign it a value of 1. And then we have our condition. So the way we do conditions in while loops is you just have the condition in parentheses, and then you have the parentheses. You have your opening and closing parentheses because the body is going to contain information, just like a for loop has a body, and so you need to have the opening and closing. And so we have to go in the order that the for loop is operating in order to get the same answer. So the next thing after you have your condition, you have to take the body of your for loop. So we're going to do that sum is plus equal to I. We have that right in there. We make sure we have our semicolon. And then for our for loop, we go back up and we're going to add the increment operator in here. So we're going to increase I. And if we didn't do that, that's where you get into problems with loops going on forever and having those loops, those infinite, that will break your computer. Don't break your computer, but will cause your computer to crash. So you need to put that in there in order to. We eventually want this condition not to be true. So we're going to add that in there, and we have to have the semicolon. So we didn't need the semicolon up here in the for loop, but you do need it down here. And then the very last thing you need to do is take the bottom part of your code, so anything outside of the loop. So this one is a print statement. We wouldn't have made a loop that looks exactly like this one if we omitted this print statement. So we have the print statement, and we just move that right over. And so now I want to show you, this is just a nice visual, so you can sort of see all of the components and where they start in a for loop and where they are in a while loop. So you can see exactly where all the pieces move. And again, the while loop, you have to think about the order of how the for loop executes in order to fit it into the while loop. So that's why you have to have the body of the code first before you do your step before you do your step increase or decrease. Otherwise, if you put this first, you'd get totally different numbers. All right, so now I'm going to show you how you can test this in Dr. Java. So you can see, in order to go through this code, I have this very, very long PowerPoint. So let's just copy this code. So in order to use in Dr. Java, in order to use the interactions pane, you can't type all of these things in there. You have to sort of paste them all in the interactions pane. If you can type in one line of code, but not a whole loop. So if we paste that in and I hit enter, you can see, and I'm just going to make this bigger so we can see everything. So when it goes through that whole loop, it outputs 10, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. And now if I go over here and I copy this code and I paste in my while loop, and if I hit enter, then again I get 10 as my output. So I know for sure that my loops are identical, or equivalent, I should say. They're not identical, they're different loops. So my for loop is going to give me the equivalent information as my while loop. And so that's what you need to do. If you have any questions, send me a message.